So here we are, Michel Laub in Brussels. And what did you think when the second round of the Brazilian presidential elections took place? Damn, merda, outra coisa.
Well, good evening. Thanks so much for coming. I don't know if there are Brazilians here, but anyway, it's Brazil is now on the news again. I was telling to Annelies before that, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, Brazil was in the news because of good reasons. We have economic growth, and the world was paying attention to Brazil in a way that it didn't before, at least in the time that I am alive and paying attention on these things. And this attention went first for the economy stuff, and after started to, of course, naturally happens in these cases, it started to go to the cultural side of Brazil. And it was very good to be a writer in that time because everybody seems interested in what we had to say about Brazil.
You're talking about what, 2005, 2007,
maybe 2008 to 2013, maybe. Yeah. I think the apps, the biggest part of it was in that Frankfurt Fair that chose Brazil to be the country,
the host country.
And after the Paris Salon did the same, so it was like 2 or 3 years with very a lot of attention in Brazil, and a lot of Brazilian writers being translated abroad. So, but it ended like the cycle of Brazilian growth, Brazilian economic growth, and we stayed like 4 or 5 months, 4 or 5 years again, without anybody caring about us. And now we are starting to have attention again for not so good reasons as before. So it's a strange feeling for a writer sometimes that for the first time in many years, I've been asking again about Brazil and about myself, about my work, relating my work to the Brazilian situation and so on. But nowadays, I can. It's very sad because it's because of something that I don't feel it's a virtuous thing. It's something that probably will put Brazil in a situation that was much worse than the situation that we were before, and it was already a bad situation.
We'll go into that situation for sure later in the conversation, but let's stick to you and your work first. This book, O Tribunal da Quinta-feira, is, let me summarize it very crudely, we can go into detail, a story of a friendship, of an exchange of emails between two friends in a certain language that they've developed amongst the two of them, between the two of them, and all of a sudden this whole conversation, or part of it, certain parts of it, is made public, thrown out there via internet, social media, and so on, and everybody who reads it has an opinion about it. Is this a book about friendship for you too?
Most of my books are about tolerance. I mean, about identity, which leads to tolerance. I mean, if you are talking about identity, you are talking about how you deal with another people's identity. So
here there is a man who is homosexual and his heterosexual friend, and they tolerate each other. And
in some way, they developed a language or a relation that allows them to get along. I mean, one of them is gay and HIV positive, and the two of them make a lot of jokes about it, and they are very rough jokes, very bold jokes. And for some reason that the book explains, these jokes went public, and it started to be interpreted by the whole society in a kind of view that you can see nowadays in the society when you have any fact that is in the news. I mean, you have the right-wing interpretation, the left-wing interpretation, the old people's interpretation, the young people's, and so on. So you can maybe realize a whole division of the society by the ways that all these people interpret only one sentence of one joke of one man, a non-important man, a private person, private citizen, which who was only speaking with his friend in privately, and he never imagined that this privacy would go public. So this is something very typical of our time. It doesn't concern only about man or gay or woman or whatever. It's something that I think that it happens with all of us all the time, and it's something to do with the concept of it's a changing concept of our time, which is the concept of intimacy. We don't have these clear frontiers between private and public that we used to have, not 1 century ago, but 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
Because of social media, because of the internet, or what changed?
I guess so. One of the main factors of that is the social media, and you can relate this to the politics in some way, because nowadays, we have a lot of explanations about what's happening in Brazil or America or Europe, and you have all the traditional explanations on economics, for instance. They are still important explanations. I will not despise it, of course. But in some way, you have another factor, which is a economic fact. Technology is economic fact, a cultural fact. You cannot separate the things. But the fact, in day by day, what you see is that the technology makes everything much more transparent, and the transparency became a value that is considered without criticism. Everybody only think in politics, for instance, that for a politic, the important thing is to be transparent. Or for this guy in Brazil, for instance, the important is that he never steals, and he so-called honest man. It's not like that, but it's the image that he has. So the transparency became a value by itself, and it has something to do with the way that we are dealing with transparency in social media, because we are not we are getting used to only speak and only act in social media, expecting that we are going to be liked, that we are going to have
retweeted, for example,
immediate
or gratification.
Immediate, applause or something like this, and this is not a way that the free speech and the free ideas and even the idea of progress goes. I mean, if to have a free society, a free idea society, you have to have contradictory. You have to have some kind of amoral character of the ideas. Otherwise, you don't go on. The science, for instance, if you don't test situations that looks strange for us, look sometimes amoral or immoral, you never discover new things. And the social media, it's an environment which everybody is afraid of speaking things that are different from the very thought of the circle, and so start to be a very childish thing in some certain way. So the book is about it, and I think the reality that we are living nowadays is in some way about it also.
There's also a link to politics there that we'll be picking up later. Before I will ask you to read an excerpt, I would like to go into the fact that you have the characters being described from, say, the 80s onwards, when AIDS came onto the stage, so to speak. I was commenting this with Pitiosis. This is quite an unusual topic here. It was very present here, of course, as well, in ways still is. But to have it in a book doesn't happen very often. You're from 73?
73.
Yeah. So you were what, 10-ish, 12-ish,
yeah,
13?
I mean, if you take in Brazil, AIDS was very strong, a strong epidemic. But I think it came later than in America, for instance. In America, have the first case in 81, and in Brazil we started to hear about in 83, 84. But it was in very small gay communities and stuff. I have that time I was I was 10 years old or
Yeah.
11 years old. So for me, it was nothing. It's not a real danger, a concrete danger.
So
But
did
I
you
was,
yeah?
but I was petrified. I was talking to Peter also. I was petrified with that, which is a kind of a paranoia state that, like all the paranoia states, or almost all, doesn't have to do specifically with their reality. So I can say that I live all my teenage years afraid of this, even if I was not making sex yet at that time.
So did you do research for that particular
I didn't
part?
have to. I didn't have because I have the strong memory of that time, and I think all my generation has it some way. I started to have sex like I don't know, 87, 98, and I was already 15, 16. But in that time, AIDS was really, really a subject of the papers. You see everyday news about it. So I started with something very distant from me, and after some years, it became something very close. And in the years after, of course, we have. I know people who died, and I think everybody knew in some way. I didn't have many people around me who died by AIDS or was contaminated. But anyway, I had sufficient number of cases to say that it was a close experience also.
Maybe this is a good time to read the first part, so we get a flavor. If you prefer to stand up, you can. If not,
can I be seated?
Of course,
I prefer.
whatever you want.
I feel very solemn to stand
Very
up.
well.
This is chapter 3, and this guy, the narrator, José Vitor, is speaking about his friend Walter, who is infected with HIV. I don't know if it's necessary to say, but you don't speak Portuguese, but
some people do.
some of
Yes.
But this book has some passages which are a bit ironic, a bit out of normal speech. So the tune of the speech sometimes is a bit out of tune. I mean, it's not a natural tone. It's not a realistic tone all the time. It's kind of a guy speaking about something that he could not speak so clearly. So he is always trying to make it. He's always making efforts to go sideways to speak about it. So for instance, he will not say the real name of the disease. He will only speak about the letters that form the word AIDS. O assunto é o mesmo desde que uma farmácia de São Francisco, Califórnia, pendurou em sua vitrine fotos de torsos masculinos cheios de manchas roxas. Era 1981 e naquela vizinhança todo mundo praticava o que antigamente era chamado de inversão, pederastia, troca-troca, chuca. Todo tipo de refugiado ia para lá. Garotos que escaparam do linchamento em cidades do meio oeste, garotos expulsos de casa porque foram pegos mexendo no rímel da mãe, dentistas de meia idade que largaram mulher e filhos em busca dos resquícios do sonho libertário dos anos 60. Uma vez vi uma entrevista com um dos moradores locais. Ele descrevia o que consideravam a guerra de uma geração. O Vietnã de quem fez 18 ou 20 anos, quando a primeira daquelas fotos foi pendurada na farmácia, enquanto para Walter ainda demoraria 2 anos. Em 83 ele estava em Bariri, a 300 quilômetros de São Paulo, cidade com 30 mil habitantes em cujos arredores o pai dele tinha uma fazenda, quando Hélio Costa apareceu no Fantástico percorrendo hospitais e conversando com médicos e pacientes dos Estados Unidos. A reportagem usava a sigla por extenso. A AIDS é a epidemia mais violenta do século. A ciência enfrenta um dos seus maiores desafios. 15 países notificaram casos. Há crianças infectadas. 75% dos atingidos morrerão em pouco tempo. Os dias finais com episódios alternados ou simultâneos de tuberculose, encefalite, meningite, pneumonia, toxoplasmose, herpes zoster, citomegalovírus e sarcoma de Kaposi. Uma lista de como o mundo teria sido se tivesse continuado como no dia anterior a isso tudo. 2 ou 3 gerações vivas, quantos engenheiros, bancários, cientistas, contadores, quantos livros e filmes e discos, e teatro e concertos e circo e dança, Quantas ideias e sonhos e dinheiro poupado e famílias que não foram destruídas. As imagens que a TV mostrava em 1981. O atentado ao Papa João Paulo II, o general Figueiredo montado a cavalo antes de uma ponte de safena em Cleveland, um gol de Zico e ninguém nas arquibancadas do Maracanã avisado sobre o que nem Hélio Costa sabia ainda. Um dia amanhecendo em Bariri, 1983, uma cidade como qualquer outra do interior. A quermesse e o coreto. O prefeito, o louco oficial, o travesti que tinha as bochechas deformadas de silicone. Uma vez os amigos de Walter beberam e foram procurar o travesti. A casa dele era conhecida. Ele abria a porta para quem aparecesse. Oferecia um conhaque e sabia quem eram aqueles meninos, a família de cada um, quem era o filho do médico, do delegado e do industrial. O piso da sala era de cimento, havia uma imagem da irmã Dulce e um aparelho de som. Walter viu os amigos mexendo nos discos, botando uma música de Cyndi Lauper, aplaudindo quando o travesti fez a sua dança imitando a cantora. Então ele tirou a camisa, depois o sutiã, e quando ele abaixou a calcinha, os amigos o seguraram e bateram nele com um pedaço de madeira. Eles repetiram os golpes na altura dos quadris e nos ris. E o travesti ganiu como um animal na chuva. E como teria sido se Walter não tivesse assistido aquela cena e as cenas dos anos seguintes, os amigos rindo e contando vantagens sobre quem tinha dado mais pauladas na bicha velha. Vocês viram como a bicha velha chorava, as lágrimas borrando a maquiagem? Walter se mudou para São Paulo também por causa disso. E as visitas a Bariri se tornaram raras. O pai se dando conta de que o filho não poderia voltar para ser fazendeiro nem traria uma noiva para ganhar benção. E como teria sido se Walter não fizesse faculdade, esta é a capital dos imigrantes, 12 milhões de habitantes e tantas oportunidades para quem tem braços de juventude, e a história dele não tivesse se tornado parecido com a minha.
Thank you. You spoke of the style of this character, the way he formulates and he whirls around. Harry Lemmes, cited by Piet Josses, was also commenting on your specific style. Tell us a bit more about that. Do you feel you write just the way you write, or is there an idea behind it?
Oh, in this book specifically, there is an idea, because, as I told you, there's a discussion about some jokes, some words that, some words that these two friends use in these jokes. So it's a question of language, discussion about language, and in some way, the whole book is also discussing language. In some way, the book is preparing the reader during, during 80 pages, 90 pages, for the first time that the real bold jokes will appear. So he's not speaking, for instance, about AIDS or about HIV. He's speaking about, first he will speak about the letters A, I, D, S, and after that he will change the name of the disease for gay cancer or whatever it was the name of that the disease was called in that time. So he's kind of making a whole history of the epidemic by changing the way that the language that they use to speak about the epidemic. So the whole things they coordinate together in order to have a discussion about language. So it's not my specific style. I already wrote books before. In some ways, I have passages of this book that are in the same level, the same tune that they were before. But usually in this book, I'm a bit more out of myself than in other books. I made an effort to be a bit more harsh in sometimes, and a bit more ironic in other, because it is a book about jokes again. So I have to be sometimes a bit cruel and about ironic, as the jokes are in the book.
Yeah, and joke specific are they specific to Brazilian kind of humor, or
I guess
is this something you see happen elsewhere as well?
I guess so. It's a difficult question because I'm not so familiar with other kind of humors. I'm familiar with the English humor, the American humor, of course, maybe the Latin humor because they are close to us. But I'm not familiar with, I don't know, the Romanian humor or whatever. I can say that there is a kind of Jewish tone. I'm a Jewish author, so I use sometimes this kind of Jewish auto-irony in other books of mine, even if sometimes it's so subtle that the people don't realize it. But in my mind, at least, I'm using it. And in this book, I think more openly I'm using it, because the character, the narrator, is all the time making jokes about other people, mocking on them, but also mocking about himself. Not mocking openly, but at least saying very, very harsh things about other people. And but the people that he is most harsh about is himself. So that's a kind of, maybe a kind of humor tradition, a human Jewish tradition.
But the jokes about himself are left out when there is a lot made public, and then it's about judging, it's about moralizing by the audience who doesn't know what really went on, what really happened. Was there an urgency to say something about the easy judging and the compartmentalization in society as well? Because it's a very timely book, written in, or just before Me Too times. It seems like it's visionary.
Yeah. No, in some way, it's a book from, it was published in Brazil in 2016. And I started to write in 2013. But in that time, 2013, it was the reason that I started. It was already clear that these things that we would have problems with these things. Problems and solutions. I mean, Me Too is a very good movement for one side. For on the other side, is you have to discuss the things also. Nowadays, it's impossible to discuss. It's too early, maybe. But probably in some years we are going to look back and see, well, there are excess here and that. So all the things, I believe, as I told before, that all the things that we have in society are possible to discuss. I mean, if literature could not discuss something that's happening in society, literature doesn't have anything to do in the world. We are in our normal life, in our day-by-day life, we are full of speeches. We are full of people talking to us things to do or things not to do. We are all the time dealing with, I don't know, religion, with ideology, with self-help, with a lot of kinds of speeches that are always in the same way of telling us what to do.
Prescriptive almost.
Telling us how to think, telling us how to do, saying that the things are very simple, and that we only have to see, to look at things in one way. And literature or art in general is, I think, is the only space that we have nowadays that allows us to look for something in another way. So if you ask about the discussion about language in the book, for instance, I can say also that it's a discussion about complexity, about how we always look at something that looks like something, of course, but if you look further, and this is a good motto for literature, look further for things, and you will see that there are people behind
more
it. There are stories behind that. And this book, in some ways, like this, is a one joke, or I don't know, half a dozen jokes. But what's behind that joke? There is a whole story of, I don't know, 4 characters who are good and bad, who made a lot of mistakes and a lot of good things. They have their beliefs and they have their cynicism also. So this is something that literature can do, and I believe that if literature has a role nowadays in the world, it would be this. I prefer, I can say that I only like to read books, read novels at least, like this, like that try to do things like this. So why, when I am writing, I would not at least try to do something like this. That's what motivated me in the first place.
But yet, literature is quiet compared to what is being shouted in the social media sphere.
Yeah, that's another, I think it's the same thing. Because when I say that literature is the space to look further for things, to look further is also to look and not say immediately something that you think or don't think about. is just look. At, I mean,
Postpone judgment.
yeah, I mean, it's sometimes being in silence to look at things and don't need to have a position on it. Don't need to look at your friends and think what they will think of me if I say that I think something about this, which is the bad thing about the social media. So I believe it's a quieter thing, literature, quieter space, a smaller space, of course, maybe a less important space in an immediate fashion, I don't know. But that's the thing that I like, and that's the thing that I choose to live for. And I believe that there are a lot of people who are interested also in literature, and probably is for those people that I write, not for the general public, because the general public nowadays, it's I mean the big masses, it's very difficult to catch their attention, and I'm sure that literature will not catch their attention if literature does the same that the social media and the news and the television are already doing.
Yeah, so you're sort of giving up on.
No, the contrary. I'm very stick to that specific, that specific characteristics of literature.
Yeah. I'm asking because what I heard in Brazil also, and not only in Brazil, here as well, is that you cannot stay silent now as an intellectual, as a writer. Yeah. You have to take a position. How does that relate to your view of literature? But you have and its role?
You have the two dimensions. I'm not quiet in social media. I'm not living in the end of in the highs of a tower or wherever. I'm also in Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And during the election, for instance, I was shouting with people and fighting and saying bullshit there. Probably I made a lot of mistakes and injustice. I don't know. But that's one dimension. When I write a book, a novel is like a sacred space. In that moment, I have to be in another, in another pace. I have to think differently. Otherwise, I will not have anything to contribute with anybody. So
do you have to go away also, distance yourself, literally?
In some way, yes. It doesn't need to be a physical distance like I'm experiencing now. But at least it's very difficult nowadays to be like this. Nobody, I think, you have this experience to you are on holiday, you are checking your cell phone or whatever, but if you can, the most you can do it, the better will be to your literature. I believe so, because otherwise you become a slave of common sense. Because the thing that happened in social media is that because we have a lot of people writing and thinking and shouting all the time. Of course, we'll have a minimal sense, common sense there. The level will get low because people who are really interested in high thoughts and nuances and whatever, they will give up to be there. So if you are influenced only by the social media, probably your level of thought and level of language, level of worldview will get low.
Is literature an elitist thing in Brazil, according to you?
Yes, I guess so. And I guess everywhere. Even in America, they have a big market, or in European countries that have high levels of reading. Of course, they are much bigger markets than us. But even in France, which used to be an example of this, you don't see any more people reading in the subways or novels. They sell. They have good sales, some of them, but I don't know. Foreign novels don't sell really well there. I know because I speak with editors and people from the market there. So they are facing a crisis as much as we. Of course, as we are a poor country and our market is smaller, our terms of crisis are much more big, much more. We are much more worried probably. But I think the problem in general, the structure of the problem is the same everywhere, because we have these gadgets that put us away from books, but it's not because of the object book. I don't care if it's paper or whatever, but it puts us away of the experience of being stick to something for long hours,
To be
to have
immersed.
to be immersed, which is the very experience of literature all
Yeah.
the time.
Mm-hmm. We spoke about social media and what it does, and what goes on in the book as well, the judgmental reading of excerpts and little stories and interpreting it in a certain way. It is what happened during this election cycle as well. Especially the Bolsonaro side bombarded people with messages through WhatsApp.
Yeah.
And actually what happened was that people got locked in their own worlds, their own groups of kindred spirits, say, and there was
bubbles.
no conversation going on, it
Yeah.
seemed. How did you experience that from afar, from Brussels?
But I was already there for all this Bolsonaro stuff. Didn't begin like 1 month ago. We were dealing with it, not only Bolsonaro, but all the politics sphere. We are dealing with it for many years already. Even in the time that Trump won the American election, it was 2016. It was the time that the book was published, the same month. I remember in interviews about the book, I was saying, and I was not visionary or whatever. It was very clear. Everybody was talking about it. That phenomenon that happened in America is something that had to do with social media also, and that we were already facing the same things in Brazil. That the people were in that time already, in WhatsApp especially, communicating to each other by using memes, which are what's a meme is like a, in some ways a kind of the old slogans, old politic propaganda slogans. So this is not really new in society. In the 30s, we have in Germany it's the worst example that we have. But in some way nowadays we have the same things, but we have in a level that we are not experienced to deal with. As we were talking before, maybe we are not inoculated against it. Again, it's like a new disease that came to the indigenous tribe or whatever, flu epidemic. In the first years, the people are just not prepared to do with it. So I have people, I can give you an example, people who are very close to me, people very well educated. I mean, they have degrees and whatever, but they are not used with the electronic possibilities of, for instance, to make an image using different times and spaces, and you put a face of somebody in the body of other, and you distort a little bit the angle of picture that suggests something that's not happening. This kind of stuff that we journalists are very used. I'm a journalist also. I look to a meme of them, and usually I can say, well, this is bullshit.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I'm 100% right all the time. Maybe I'm getting fooled also like 10% or 15%. But these people who are educated, but they are not dealing with information because they are engineers or, I don't know, other professions, doctors or whatever, they are now experiencing something that maybe me and you, we spend years working on it to get the right feeling to identify false or truth. And these people, they are grown people, intelligent people, cultural people, but they are not used to it, not trained to it. And sometimes they really are making big mistakes about it. So the people talk to me, and it's funny because I cannot say this is a lie or this is, because I don't have the source to say sometimes that this is a lie. For instance, I can say it's obviously a lie, but the people say, "How do you know that's a lie?" And I don't know. And really, I don't know. Which is one of the factors that makes this fake news so effective. Is that sometimes they are very obvious, but sometimes they are not. And part of the strategy, if you read about, I don't know, Cambridge Analytica and stuff, what they do in Trump election, they did like this. They put all kind of fake news in for all kinds of political views. So they have radical left memes and radical right also. they just spread it in all the levels, on a very crude one, very sophisticated ones, and what they will have as a result in the end of it was a very polarized society, and they knew it before, and it was
the goal.
It was the goal, and it was what happened. So in Brazil, we had the same. Sometimes you have very stupid stuff, but sometimes have sophisticated stuff.
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't need sophisticated stuff. You just, like in the book, you have politicians giving interviews every day. One day of the week, he will say something stupid, one sentence. So this is enough for this
For the wildfire.
for all the fire hosting,
Yeah,
they calling this. So that's the thing that we have to face for the next year, and we still don't know how to face it.
No, I was going to ask you, but because the idea of inoculation is rather optimistic and positive, like, okay, we'll have to sweat it out for a couple of years and then we'll come to our senses. Is that what you think will happen?
It's an optimistic way of seeing it. I hope so. It's the best option we have, because the damage is already done in some way.
Mm-hmm.
In Brazil,
yeah, and
it's
in the
already
meantime,
done.
you
have this guy. It's not because he's a right wing or whatever. I didn't vote him, but I would say if a right wing to guy win the election, I would say, oh, okay, it's democracy. Let's face 4 years and try to to change politics by other ways or whatever. But this guy is another kind of politics. He's a kind of Trumpist or Berlusconi.
Mm-hmm. Would you say he's extreme right?
He is in his thoughts, of course. Probably he will not do all the things he will say, because politics always has our own system of balances and counterbalance or whatever. But the thing is, he's very unprepared, very uneducated, very incompetent. And this by itself, it's very, very bad in a country like Brazil. It's not like in America that they have institutions that could detain in some way Trump's incompetence, because Trump is also the same kind of guy who one day says something, other day will say something opposite, which is very bad for government. Good for news, which is what he does, and bad for government. And in Brazil, we will have probably the same thing, but Brazil doesn't have, institutions, Congress, justice, the press. They are not so developed as America. So we are in a great risk of being severely harmed by this confusion that will be the Bolsonaro's government.
And what kind of harm could that lead to? Because when I was in Brazil, I spoke to people who were really worried about being gay and encountering violence, or working in a social movement and feeling like we could be criminalized and fair game to anyone.
We have all kinds of risks. I mean, in these circles, I believe that we probably will have institutional backlash, because we have some advances in the last year, and probably the new government will work to go back in some civil rights legislation, because the Congress is really conservative. It doesn't have anything to do with Bolsonaro, but it will get together to put things behind, like I don't know, with the guns legislation or the education legislation. They are discussing something about teachers in classes, or to forbidding them to teach sexual education. This kind of thing, I think we will have, and I'm quite afraid of what would have if we have some kind of, I don't know, this kind of government of Bolsonaro. We are treating him like a fascist. It's very difficult to say that this is fascism or not, because we have different moments. We are not in the 30s anymore. A lot of things are different nowadays. So it's not a fascist regime like we had in that time, but we have fascist characteristics that I think that apply today. And one of them is that, even in Germany, in Spain they have it, in Italy, that thing that the government is one thing and the society is another thing, that they are kind of bound together by, syndicates or whatever. But in some way, the government is a kind of symbolic allowance for people who are in the streets to act by themselves violently. The government doesn't need to be so violent itself.
Yeah.
The government
So it creates this
makes
environment
speeches,
where
and
it's okay.
that for instance, is against gay people or whatever. Of course, the government will not create a concentration camp or whatever. It's impossible nowadays. But you have groups, militias in Brazil. You already have in the internet, and sometimes in the real life, you already have cases of it. So I'm really afraid that they could do something like this to make aggressions, and they are already. We had it before Bolsonaro. It's not only because Brazil is a very violent and anti-GLB and
LGBTQI, yeah.
anti-gay or
in spite of having one of the largest gay parades.
Yeah, but it's contradictory. It's
yeah.
in the same avenue where the gay people were frequently killed or aggressed by people, common people in the street. So this is something that can happen. And in major stuff, in economic stuff, political stuff, we are already experiencing the effects of the extreme unpreparedness of Bolsonaro. This week we have. Sorry if I'm being too long here, but this week, just for instance, he said like three things about foreign policy, and the three things were very bad for us. Immediately, we have immediate effects of it. He spoke something about the Jerusalem capital of Israel.
He wants to move the embassy to Jerusalem.
And immediately Egypt cut a meeting that we have there, because we have a lot of commerce with the Arab countries. And he said something, his minister said something against Mercosur, which is the regional agreement, economic agreement with Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay. And we already have a reaction from Germany, who negotiates directly with Mercosur, not with Brazil. And it's a huge stuff, talking about exportations and stuff. And he speaks something about China, and the government of China, which is very discreet in these matters, they sign something, they put a document saying, well, we don't know, we are very worried about Brazil. So, because he spoke something about the exportations, and China is like 1/4 of our exportation, something like this. And so we have already in 1 week, because of nothing, just
things
bullshit that he said, we are already in danger to lose markets, important markets. Of course, it's not going to happen from one day to another, but it's a direction that we see that's going to happen all the time during his mandate, because he is unprepared. It's simple like that. Trump can say anything he wants, but nobody will cut commerce with America. That's the difference. And Brazil is not so important to be so cocky about himself and stuff. And that's what he's doing.
You said literature is a place where we can think and experiment with who we are and how we want to live and so on. Do you feel what is going on now in Brazil will influence your writing in some way?
I guess it's impossible not to, because at least if you decide not to speak anything about politics, to be very, alienated, we call
but
it.
More political than the books you've written so far, because you write about identity, you said about tolerance, in the other books as well.
I'm sure that my last books at least are very political, but even if I decided to be very alienated nowadays, I would be a politic by doing that, because in a situation like this, if you decide to be alienated, you are making a statement in some way. So it's a trap. You don't have anywhere to go. In some way, the reality will affect your work. And it's not my decision to be alienated. On the contrary, probably I will be even more direct than I have been in the last books. But I'm sure that there will be many Brazilian writers who will decide to do the opposite. And I think it's good to have people who do the opposite, because otherwise, again, we will submit literature to another pace, not its own pace. And literature is part of the world, of course. It dialogues with politics and reality, but it's something different. It's not reality, it's not politics. If it were reality and politics, it would not be literature.
No,
This
it
is
would be
it's
journalism,
obvious,
for
but
example.
yeah. It would be another thing. So I think it's important to keep our autonomy in some way. I don't know which autonomy. It's a long discussion, but maybe it's the autonomy of language, the autonomy of time. You have your reader, if you're lucky. You have your reader for some time, spending his hours or her hours with you. So you have to be grateful for it, and to be to face this challenge, and to be and not to hide yourself from this challenge. You have this opportunity to speak to a person who is listening to you. And in politics and news and whatever, most of the people are not listening.
So there is not going to be a Brazil in Bolsonaro times, or the failure of the left in Brazil book
not so
literature next year.
Probably not so direct.
No.
But in some way, if you are thinking about intimacy, for instance, nowadays, and all the novels, in some way, some level they deal with it, to put your characters and the psychological characteristic of them. And these are not things that are out of the blue. You are in a contest. So nowadays, for instance, if you're speaking about a teacher in Brazil, I don't know, a psychiatrist in Brazil, all these professions that deal with the formation of people, with the intimacy of people in some way, they are dealing with this great efforts of the cultural regime, not only the government regime, of the cultural regime, to influence there, to penetrate there, to
control it.
To control in some way. That's another characteristic of fascism, if we're talking about. This hatred against gay people, for instance. I think that there are a very obvious relation between the need to control the desire of people, the intimacy of people, and the impossibility of controlling desire, for instance. This is a psychoanalytic obvious stuff, but you can see this, the people, Bolsonaro people, is very obsessed about sexual life, and which is really
propriety and what is done and what isn't.
And really is not, if you think clearly, it's not a problem of Brazil. Brazil has a lot of problems, but this problem,
it's not the main.
You can have, of course, I'm exaggerating. Of course, we have problems, and you have rapes and whatever. But our priority is not to discuss this. And these people in the government, they think that our priority, we're having a big economic crisis, and the priority nowadays is to control sexual education in schools. This is something so real. I cannot believe sometimes that I listen hours and hours of people talking about it and discussing it.
Before I ask you to join in, one more question for you. A question I'm asked often about Brazil is, why do people not revolt more? Why is there no revolution? Why is there no aggression then, maybe, but against the elite, against those in power that abuse and use the Brazilians? What is your answer?
One of my answers is that this Bolsonaro election is a kind of reaction, a kind of revolution in some way. I don't like it.
But maybe against their own interests of many people who voted for him.
Lots of revolutions are against the people's own interests. I think sometimes it's more common to have revolutions against the people's interests than the opposite. It's funny if you see history. And I don't like it. I despise in some way these people. But one thing that I have to recognize is that they are revolting against the system. They are voting against politics, against elite, which was the same in the fashion. Fashion was an anti-system movement in that time. It's a kind of revolution. In that time, it was much more violent because the context of the time was in favor of violence. Nowadays, you have instruments to do it with a less violent way. So we have social media to express. You have the Congress. You have the elections. The people can vote. So they will use these instruments, and they are using. So that's what's happening in Brazil. In 2013, we have huge movements. First, they were left-wing movements.
O gigante acordou. The giant woke up was then the slogan.
And soon after that, it was took by right-wing people, and even these military people, that pro-military people that are now in power, they began to be more known, and we began to see them more openly in the 2013 protests. Before they were very ashamed because we have the dictatorship and so on. So they are not saying that those absurds in public. They are a bit constrained by society, by the rules, and after that they became openly.
And now they are legitimized because of.
And they think they are right because now they have a huge votation. So
yeah. And in the meantime, the opposition.
I don't know. That's the sad subject of our Brazil now. This is how the opposition will work now on. They are very. I guess the left, in usual, are very lost in Brazil. They have to, in some way, they have to make a huge process of auto exam, and they will not do it probably. And even if they do, probably, I'm not sure that it will be for a good reason, and it will be in a good direction.
Why is that so difficult for the left in Brazil?
Now we have historical reasons, but I think nowadays, if you're not
because
talking about
maybe I should say very briefly, one of the slogans that was used or that was constantly repeated when we went around in Rio was also of people who did not want to vote for Haddad, the candidate of the PT, was it will be another Venezuela if he gets into power, or they have never distanced themselves from Venezuela, or they've never said sorry for everything that went wrong and that they did wrong, and the corruption they also took part in.
Yeah. I mean, the main reason is, I guess, the failure of Dilma Rousseff's government. I have no doubt about it. So it's very difficult, even for me in the second term of the election, I was defending Haddad, which was the left-wing candidate. And I told her it was very difficult for me to defend him when I spoke with, people from my city, old friends, friends from school who were voting for Bolsonaro. I spoke about Bolsonaro, they agree with everything. Oh, this is incompetent, this is a clown, this is a dangerous man, or whatever. But they always say, and what are you going to do? You're going to vote this...
The other guy?
The other guy who is hiding behind Lula and who is in jail and who left the government, Dilma Rousseff left government with a big crisis and a lot of corruption scandals, which were, of course, very exaggerated sometimes by the media and the justice. We have this problem also, but we cannot say that this is invention. They actually had a scheme of corruption, a big one, and they did a lot of things wrong. So it was very difficult for me to say. What I used to say was in this discussion was, well, like it's not a good thing to say in an election. I would say, well, this is not going to be a good government at that. I think it's going to be a mediocre government, but at least we know him. He will not do anything spectacularly wrong. He's an honest man. He's a prepared guy. Really, individually, he's a good politician. But it's not the kind of thing that you use to convince people. In the other side, the
other one is worse. Sort of argument.
In the other side, they were voting for they call Bolsonaro mito, a myth, and it was a very messianic way, messianic movement in some way. So in that time, at least, was very difficult to combat
Yeah.
it because they say, well, this is the captain. He's a captain of army. He's the captain who will combat corruption and he will save us. Or
Must be like
it
a
was in this
superhero.
level
Yeah.
of argument. It was very difficult to deal with it.
Who are your literary heroes?
In
Who are your influences? Who do you read? Who do you...
a lot of readers in the past, Brazilian, international, but I can say I can say nowadays the living authors I like a lot of writers. It's difficult to answer this question. I'm thinking about what I'm gonna say, but
You haven't got a list prepared for... Isn't this
because
a
I
question you get asked all
because
the time?
the fact is that I don't have now a hero. I like, for instance, G.M. Coetzee. I love him. Every book that he writes, I read. I just read his last novel, the second one of the Jesus childhood.
Series,
and,
yeah.
And this is one guy that I like, but I cannot say that he's a hero or whatever. There are books of him that I don't like so much. I just read, I don't know, Lucia Berling. And so these are the books that the people usually are reading because they are very successful and they are in a list. But there are, of course, very small books that were very important for me from Brazilian authors that you probably
Name one or two for us, please.
In the very beginning, I don't know, João Gilberto Nós, a Brazilian writer, Rubem Fonseca, they were quite known in Brazil. But also bande dessinée, a lot of
comic
comic books and bad stuff that I used to read as a teenager. I used to read a lot of Agatha Christie, for instance, which probably is not good literature in some academic sense, but it teaches me a lot of sense of structure of the plot. And nowadays that I'm a grown up, trying to be a grown up, I can see that she was influenced by a lot of writers from the modernism. And it was funny because I didn't know what was modernism in that time. I was 14 years old and I was not a great, I was a good reader, but good reader in a systematic way. I didn't know schools of literature or whatever. So I didn't know what was modernist. I'd never heard of, for instance, I don't know, Henry James in that time. And I read Agatha Christie and I was very impressed by, for instance, there's one book of hers that the narrator is the assassin. So he only reveals it in the end. So it was the first time that I got contact with the concept of the untrustable narrator, for instance. And this comes, of course, from the modernists, from Ford Madox Ford or Henry James. In Brazil, we have a very fine writer who did it. Machado de Assis is considered our
translated also
our
into
our
Dutch,
biggest writer, and he did it. But I didn't read him in that time. So Agatha Christie was the door for me to open in this specific. I'm giving only one example. This specific kind of narration. And there are a lot of things that I learned by cheap literature that probably make the same way of taking things of the masters and putting in a much more popular way, and that was enough for me at I don't know 13 or 14.
Yeah, it's a two-way door.
Yeah.
You get from one world into the other and back. Okay. Do you have any questions for Michel Laub? Because I would like to offer you the opportunity. It's a once in a lifetime, or maybe two or thrice in a lifetime chance. Can be about literature, about his books, or about politics.
You're most from you mostly speak French or Dutch?
Who speaks Dutch?
Yeah,
Okay.
mostly Dutch.
And
the translation of the book was in Dutch?
was in Dutch.
Okay.
And who here has been to Brazil? Maybe an interesting, okay. And you are here because of literature or because of Brazil?
Because you are passing by in the street and saw a
Both,
door
okay.
open.
No particular questions? Then I thank you. There is a microphone coming just to make sure for the recording.
I was wondering, at the beginning of the interview, you spoke about how Brazil, 10 years ago until 5 years ago, was experiencing an economic growth, an economic peak, and Brazil and some other South American countries were becoming economic superpowers on the global scale. But now there's a crisis in Brazil, a political crisis, an economic crisis. There's an economical crisis in Argentina. Do you think that this is a giant relapse or just a small step back on South American growth?
In Brazil specifically, I can talk better. I think I've been through like 3 big crises since I'm a child, so I can remember these 3 ones, and they have something in common because we always it's easy for us to say that the governments were bad, and they were bad. They have no excuses, but they are bounded to something that we are. Now I can see that we are bounded, which is the economic international market. So we are very dependent of commodities, for instance. And once the commodities are up, when the prices are up, Brazil is well. And once the prices went down, Brazil went bad. And that's a rule. We see in big cycles since the cycles of the sugar cane after the gold cycle, the rubber cycle in the past, and nowadays the petrol, the oil cycle, and so it's something that happens frequently, and that's why I'm telling it's different. Brazil is different from America because we don't have so much independence in this subject. We are very bounded to international commerce, so we don't have so much freedom to say whatever we want to say about other countries, as this guy Bolsonaro, for instance, thinks he had, and this is our destiny.
The curse, yeah.
Even
So
in Venezuela, which is in a terrible situation now, and it was in a very good situation like 10 years ago. I don't know in Chad. It was nowadays is not only Maduro's guilt. It's a lot of Maduro's guilt, but not only. And in that time, it was not only due to Chavez's success. It was because of the oil prices were high in that time, and now they are low. So the economy is in Venezuela much more than Brazil. Venezuela is like these Arab countries from the Middle East which only depends in oil. So a small variation in the price affects all the countries' economy. In a small scale, we are something like this also.
someone else? No?
Can I take you back to what is the significance of the title, please?
Tribunal. I think that in Dutch that is the same as the Thursday court. Quinta-feira, Thursday is the day that everything happened in the book. He's narrating from a Thursday. The things started to happen on Sunday, and it's like 4 days of plot. And of course, he's remembering his past and so on. So, in some way, it has something to do with the rapid process that we are facing nowadays. Is the Thursday court, is not the Friday court, because in Friday it will be another court, and Saturday will be another court in some way. And the court is not a real court; it's like a metaphorical court, which is the internet, is the public space that everybody's looking at everybody and judging everybody at the same time.
It's like he's defending himself.
Yeah. The tune of the book is to defend, is him like speaking with an audience. Oh, dear people, here I am. So that's the kind of irony that I thought before. It's not real. It's somebody telling, well, look at me here. It's kind of dramatic, and this is something that the book has.
But you have no specific... Yeah, here's another question.
In the interview, you also talked about being, you're on Twitter, I think, or on social media, and you're, a journalist, and they have a tendency of speaking out on Twitter. But you're on the other hand a writer, and I think the difference between people that speak out on social media is that they usually disregard nuance and they make the debate a lot more polarized, whereas writers usually add nuance and complexity and make stuff more layered. I was just wondering, like, as you are doing both, what is that to you, or how do you see it? Do you think people should speak out more when they see, people like Bolsonaro rising up, or should they? Or how do you is that relationship like for yourself?
Well,
Or
I
are
mean,
you a bit schizophrenic?
yeah, it's. I think social media is a part of life nowadays. I don't know if somebody here is not in social media or doesn't have any contact. It's quite impossible. It's
You're not?
but
Totally.
in
And
some way it comes to
serves
you.
you.
Probably it's the things that you read are influenced by that, and the talk with the people. So that's part of life, and even in language, the social media now is you can see, for instance, when it 20 years ago somebody started to say a special slang, for instance. This slang could be in dictionaries. It would be a process that it took years
Years, yeah.
from a street slang to be in a dictionary, because the word got a little longer to spread in that time, and nowadays it's immediately. Sometimes somebody creates a special word in the internet. In 1 week, everybody's talking like that, So that's an example of how the language changed in a big speed nowadays, and a huger speed than before. And for a writer, this is also a good experience to have to see the things happening in this fashion. So social media is not only, of course, a bad thing. In the beginning, I was enthusiastic user of social media, and I still think that they have very good stuff on there. Even in that citizen campaign of internet, which sometimes kills the reputation of somebody with not unjustly, but usually they are doing the right thing. They are facing, they are fighting big corporations and government, which is a good thing. So the schizophrenic thing is you can think about in a kind of time economy. I mean, attention economy. This is an opposition, and you have to deal with this schizophrenia. But in other levels, like the language level, sometimes it's something that helps you, and you even are very well informed also as well by social media. So it's something that you, as
have to
everything in
learn to
life, you have
manage.
to learn
Yeah.
to manage. I think is the big challenge nowadays. I think in the last year, I was overwhelmed by social media, especially in the last month because of Bolsonaro's election. So now my effort in these days after the election, in the last 2 weeks, I think I tweet only once or something, because it's
You
something
tweeted
that
about this event.
yeah.
Thank you for
yeah,
that.
Yeah, that's something that I'm thinking about a lot. How not to be a victim of it, because it's like Trump in America. He's doing it all the time. Every day he says something stupid, and everybody's talking about it. And he does it with one hand, and with the other hand he passes legislation. He does important things that the people are not paying attention. So that's the game nowadays. So if you are so stick to superficial things and become angry every day, it's not a good thing for you and not for the society, I guess. So that's a way of learning to deal with
Something
it.
to deal with, yeah. More? No? Okay, so my last question to you is, what is the feeling you leave Brussels with now? And what task have you set yourself?
Well, I came here first to be a bit isolated, which was a bit difficult during the election. But at least I could work a lot. I was mostly at home, but I could see things in the city. And as a writer, after you become a writer, I became a writer when I was in my 20s, I guess. I was 22, 23. you start to live directly. You always live, thinking about how you are going to use your living in your literature. It's a kind of vampire way of living, which is very bad for people who are around you sometimes. But this is something that you don't choose. So this applies for the residency to Brussels. I cannot. Of course, I went to museums and see things, but the important things probably that I will take from the city are the things that I will use someday in my books, and maybe they are not physical things or visible things. Maybe I will never put Brussels in a novel or whatever, but I'm sure I will use something that happened here, some conversation that I have with a guy in the bar or whatever. In some way they will appear someday. I know it. I'm sure, because it always happens. So in that sense, which is a kind of very, is a homage that I can do to the city. In some way, it will always be with me, and in some day will be in one of my books, which is the best way for me to express my thankful thoughts about the city, about Passa Porta, and about the people here.
Okay, that's nice to hear. Thank you very much. Maybe for the very last bit, and to round off in beauty and style, will you read the last part that you had indicated? So we have...
Okay. Well, this one is he talking about his ex-wife?
That's number 11, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a long one. It's better to shorter? Okay.
Do you feel more comfortable keeping it shorter? When you stop, they'll stop subtitling. Or
Okay.
It's very beautiful. You can read it.
Okay. All right. Sorry.
exactly, people are
If you are hungry
enthusiastic.
or whatever. Sorry. Quem me apresentou o Teca foi o Walter. O ano era 2010. Eu havia acabado de sair do namoro com Simone e ele disse: "Você precisa conhecer essa minha amiga. Acho que você vai se animar um pouco. Ela vai dar um jantar sexta-feira. Ela é bonita e inteligente. Ela é arquiteta e acho que faz seu tipo. Hoje há aplicativos que fazem isso para o cliente. Você analisa as candidatas e faz a escolha considerando quem tem os mesmos interesses e opiniões. E, além disso, sabe escrever sem cometer erros gramaticais ou lógicos. E posta fotos de frente e de perfil. E usando um vestido de chita e uma sandália que mostra a cor do esmalte preferida. Então é possível pular etapas que antigamente nos fariam arruinar um jantar no primeiro minuto ao desdenhar de algum assunto ao qual a outra pessoa dedicou metade da sua vida. Mas em 2010 era diferente, ao menos para mim. Eu cheguei a esse jantar arranjado por Walter. Ali estava Teca à minha frente, uma incógnita de gostos, sensibilidade, honestidade e nível de informação. Um universo inteiro a descobrir, além da conversa superficial com o meu amigo, na qual fiquei sabendo que ela terminara o mestrado em urbanismo na França e havia passado mais um tempo fora do Brasil, e na volta assumiu o lugar guardado desde sempre no escritório do Sr. Teco pai e da Sra. Teca mãe. E o que mais se pode dizer de uma pessoa que parece tão vivida e cultivada? A melhor forma de se convencer de que uma separação foi acertada é botar uma lupa apenas em coisas ruins ou aborrecidas desde o dia em que um casal se conhece. Teca falou da estante de livros, conversamos sobre a estrutura, a parede nua de fundo, a pintura e o espaço para que o peso dos volumes não vergue as prateleiras. Eu perguntei sobre aqueles títulos todos e falei: parece estranho, mas publicitários sabem ler. Alguns até sem mexer os lábios. E ela riu e bebemos bastante vinho, e é tudo um lugar comum até certo ponto. Nós dois no sofá, uma perna que encosta na outra, os convidados que reparam e aos poucos vão embora, ninguém oferecendo carona para mim ou estendendo a despedida. Há taças e pratos na cozinha. A sala está à meia luz. Teca tem uma vitrola dessas que voltaram à moda e tocam MPB vagamente irônica em volume baixo. A noite está agradável, eu sinto o cheiro do cabelo dela e passo a mão na perna dela e tiro o sapato, e ela bota a mão na minha camisa e chega ao zíper do meu jeans, e eu subo em cima dela e abaixo o tronco até que meu rosto fique prensado entre as coxas dela. E eu fico ali por algum tempo até que ela me puxa e me vira de barriga para cima, e agora ela está montada em cima de mim. O rosto com uma expressão que não teve aqui, E eu sinto o calor localizado que sinaliza a última chance de parar, mas ela diz, só um pouquinho, vai, a gente precisa experimentar para ver se funciona. E a voz dela já não é a de quem está prestando atenção no que diz, e o calor localizado passa a ser sinal de outra coisa. Uma ligação na semana seguinte, um cinema, uma caminhada de mãos dadas pela primeira vez, aquilo que a maioria das pessoas busca pela vida inteira. Talvez não se devesse dizer a palavra amor à toa, mas é o que resume um momento assim. Eu olho para a Teca e ela entende na hora. Eu entrando e saindo dela e os dois já a caminho de dizer a palavra sem se constranger. É tão físico e tão pouco físico. Há tão pouco mistério e ao mesmo tempo é tão difícil de explicar. E por causa desse estalo, tudo subitamente se ilumina. E passo a achar interessante o que ela diz e as coisas que ela gosta. E a minha libido agora está sintonizada com as demonstrações de maturidade e consciência social da minha então futura ex-mulher. O arrebatamento por alguém que gosta daqueles filmes antigos e delicados, daqueles livros de jantares, das ponderações sobre a sabedoria do design simples e o papel do urbanismo e da integração das comunidades com o espaço público nessa espécie de pornografia da virtude, como se a revista que folhei aos 11 ou 12 anos, nas páginas mostrasse não a dona de casa cujo marido viajou a negócios, mas personagens que andam de bicicleta e vão a protestos em frente ao MASP, com balões de diálogo expondo as declarações sobre carbono free e sororidade. E a cada noite que sinto a textura do corpo de Teca, eu interpreto meu entusiasmo como um sinal, a premonição de uma verdade sexual, afetiva e existencial que logo viraria um casamento promissor, em vez da ilusão que caduca no dia em que deixo de ter atração por ela ou ela deixa de ter atração por mim.
Ladies and gentlemen, Michel Laub. Muito obrigada.